Hello there, and welcome to the Double Zero Challenge channel. We do just one thing on this channel, and that's to take these two D10 dice and see how long it takes before we can roll a double zero. If you'd like to play along, please write down your guess now, but just write it down for yourself. Don't put it in the comments. Let other people watch the video and find out for themselves. There will be other things to explain as we go along, but with odds of 1 in 100 against us, let's get cracking. So, rule number 1. That is a 3 and an 8. I will read them all out as we go along. And that is an 8 and a 1. And we have a 7 and a 3. And that's an 8 and a 4. That's a 2 and a 3. And we have a 4 and a 1. We have there a 9 and an 8. And that's a 1 and a 4. And we have a 9 and an 8. That's an 8 and a 5. And we have a 7 and a 1. And that's a 0, but it's a 3. Remember, we're only looking for a double zero. We will count any other doubles as we come to them. I'll explain a bit more once we roll one. Meanwhile, it's a 2 and a 3. And that's a 5 and a 4. And that is a double 7. Now we put them on the bottom row here. On the way to 1 in 100, the odds, we'd expect to see 9 other doubles. Of course, hypothetical odds don't match real world conditions, blah, blah, blah. But we keep a count of them anyway, just to see how closely they tally. So let's move on. That is a 1 and a 6. And that's an 8 and a 5. And we have a 2 and a 4. And that's a 9 and a 7. That's the 0, but it's a 2. Close, but not close enough. And we have a 4 and a 1 there. And that's a 5 and an 8. That's a 6 and a 7. And we have a 4 and a 3. That's a 0, but it's a 6. That's a 0, but it's a 1. That is a 3 and a 9. And that is a 6 and a 7. And we have an 8 and a 6. That's a 9 and a 5. A 6 and an 8. And we have a 3 and a 9. That's a 4 and a 9. And a 3 and a 7. It's a 0, but it's an 8. That's a 6, and that's a 5. Never mind that it's off the board. If you're a regular viewer, you know it still counts. I hardly ever edit this channel. We have a 3 and a 4. And that's an 8 and a 6. That's a 0, but it's a 5. That is a 5 and a 7. And that's a 4 and a 5. And we have a 7 and an 8. And that's a 6 and a 3. And that is a double 2, only the second double of the session, and we're nearly at 50 rolls, but that's the way the odds work out in the real world. So 45, roll 45 rather, is 2 and a 4. When we get up to 50, by the way, we're going to do a massive double hander one. We do that for every multiple of 50. That's coming up in just a moment. And that's a 6 and a 4. And we have a 5 and a 3. That's a 7 and an 8. And that's a 3 and a 6. And number 50 is a 0, but it's a 2. So we play on for 100 rolls. And so the next one is a 7 and a 4. And that's a 6 and a 1. And we have a 3 and a 1. That's a 5 and a 2. And we have a 1 and a 6. That's a 4 and a 5. And we have a 7 and a 3. That's a 2 and an 8. We have a 0, but we have a 6. We have a 0, but we have a 3. And that is a double 1, only the third one of the session. That's a 2 and a 9. We have a 0, but we have an 8. And that's a 2 and a 7. And that's a 5 and a 1. We have a 9 and a 6. And that's a 1 and a 2. We have a 2 and a 9. And that's a 3 and a 5. And we have a 3 and a 4. We have a 0, but we have a 7. That's a 0, but it's a 4. And that's a 4 and a 1. We have a 5 and a 6. And that's a 3 and a 6. We have a 4 and a 3. And that's a 1 and a 3. We have a 3 and a 5. That's a 6 and an 8. And that's a 7 and a 9. We have an 8 and a 7. That is a double three, our fourth three of the session, our fourth double of the session, rather. And that's a 9 and a 2. And we have an 8 and a 1, 1 and a 9, and that's an 8 and a 2. We have a 3 and a 5, and that's a 3 and a 7, and that's a 6 and a 3, and we have an 8 and a 3. Here we go. That's a 7 and a 3, a 0, but it's a 5. And that's a 0, but it's a 9. And we have a 2 and a 6. And that's a 2 and a 7, just 5 rolls away from the next double hander. We have a 0, but we have a 9. And that's an 8 and a 7. We have a 2 and a 6. And that is a 2 and a 3. And the massive roll for 100 is a 4 and a 7. And so we carry on for 150 rolls. That's a 2 and a 4. And a 3 and a 5. That's a 0, but it's a 5. That is a double 4. Add that to the pile. And we have a 0, but we have a 1. That's a 4 and an 8. It's a 0, but it's a 3. A 4 and a 1. And that's a double 2. Sixth double of the session. We would expect statistically to see a few more by now, but sometimes the way it goes, and it's certainly the way it's going tonight. 5 and a 7. Oh, well, you can just knock that over. We have a 9 and a 3. And that's a 0, but it's a 2. That's a 3 and an 8. And that is a double 1. Seventh double of the session. And a 1 and a 6. We have a 9 and a 2. And that's a 1 and a 7. It's a 4 and a 5. It's a 0, but it's a 3. It's a 5 and a 3. That's a 0, but it's a 6. Not the first time we've seen that combination. And that's a 2 and a 5. We have a 4 and a 3. It's a 0, but it's a 2. And that's a 4 and an 8. And it's a double 5. Stick that down there. We have an 8 and a 2. And that's a 4 and a 1. We have a 7 and a 5. And that is a double 9. Just rotate that to make sure. There we go. There are little lines under it, but sometimes I just can't mentally rotate it. And although it's not what we're looking for, I do still want to get it right. We carry on. 2 and a 7. We have a 0, but we have a 3. And that's a 3 and a 5. And we have a 3 and an 8. And it's a double 2, which brings us to the 10th double of the session. That is a double 5. Another one. And that's a 1 and a 2. We have a 4 and a 7. And that's an 8 and a 4. We have a 6 and a 7. And that's an 8 and a 2. We have a 3 and a 2. And that's a 1 and a 7. That's a 0, but it's a 3. We have a 9 and a 3. Just 5 rolls away from the big 150 roll. Well, first, we have a 3 and a 5. And that's a 3 and an 8. A 1 and an 8. And we have a double 7. So that goes on the pile. And the big 150 roll. That is a 5 and a 4. So we'll play on for 200 rolls. That's a 4 and a 2. And we have a 9 and a 3. That's a 0, but it's a 9. That is a 9. Again, my rotation isn't up to scratch this session. We have a 4 and a 7. And that's a 5 and a 7. That's a 2 and a 1. And we have an 8 and a 7. That's a 1 and a 9. We have an 8 and a 4. And that's a 2 and a 5. And that's a 5 and a 6. We have a 2 and an 8. And that's an 8 and a 5. And we have an 8 and a 6. It's a 3 and an 8. And it's a 3 and a 4. And that is an 8 and a 9. And we have a 4 and a 9. And that is a 9 and a 6. We have a 4 and a 6. It's a 0, but it's a 2. Also, the first 0 we've seen for a while. That's a 9 and a 4. And we have a 5 and a 3. That is a double 2. That their 13th double of the session. So very much behind statistically. We're about 175 rolls in. And that's a 9 and a 1. It's a 0, but it's a 2. It's a 7 and an 8. And that's a 6 and a 5. We have a 5 and a 6. And that's a 1 and a 9. And we have a 9 and a 7. And that's a 7 and a 6. It's a 7 and a 1. And we have a 5 and a 6. That is a 7 and a 6. And we have a 7 and a 2. That's a 7 and an 8. That's a 2 and a 4. And a 2 and a 3. We have a 7 and a 9 there. And that's an 8 and a 5. We have a 6 and a 3. And that's a 7 and a 6. We have a 5 and a 4. And that's a 9 and a 7. And again, when we get up to 200, we will have the double hander. But first, it's a 0, but it's a 5. That's a 4 and a 9. And we have a double 3. Stick that down there. We have an 8 and a 1. And the big 200 is a 0, but it's a 6. So we carry on. Remember, the hypothetical odds of rolling a double 0 are 1 in 100, and we've gone twice as long. So let's just play this out, see how long it takes before we get our elusive numbers. We have a 9 and a 1 there. And that's a 3 and a 4. That's an 8 and a 1. Oh, lovely jubbly. Okay, so that, hoisted by my own non-editing policy, we've got a 7 on the board. So it's definitely not going to be a winner, but let us look at the floor. And the purple one is showing a 0. So we'll pretend it didn't go for a walk. It's a 7, but it's a 0. No, it's a 0, but it's a 7. Never mind. I think my mind is going for a walk now. What we play on is a 0 and a 3. And that's a 3 and an 8. And we have a double 1 there, our 15th double of the session. And that's a 0, but it's an 8. And we have a 0, but it's a 9. And that's a 0, but it's an 8. And that is a 6 and a 3 there. Another edge roll. And we have a 6 and an 8. It's a 0, but it's a 7. That's a 5 and a 2. It's a 0, but it's a 3. That is a 6 and a 1. And that's a 0, but it's a 4. A 2 and a 6. And that is a 6 and a 2. That's a 2 and an 8. And we have a 4 and a 7. It's a 0, but it's a 3. And we have a double 8 there. And that's a 0, but it's a 3. And we have a 5 and a 7. It's a 0, but it's a 4. It's a 1 and a 5. And that's a 4 and a 6. And it's a double 3. Putting that down there, we've got the 17th double of the session. We have a 5 and a 9. It's a 0, but it's a 4. And that, finally, is a double 0. So let's top this up. We've got 200 to 10 to 22, 30, 232 rolls to take us up to double 0 territory. And along the way, we saw statistically less than average 17 doubles. So, well done if you guessed anything in the region of 232. And sometimes, as I keep saying, I say it just about every video, hypothetical odds don't match real world conditions, and that is the proof in the pudding. So thank you very much for watching this video. You take care, and roll on next time.